Well, hello there. We are getting ready to start our first system of the body, and we're starting with the cardiovascular system. But tonight's lecture is going to be about blood. So we're going to discuss this particular tissue within the cardiovascular system first, and then we'll move on to studying more of the system. Blood is often called the river of life because its main function is to transport materials everywhere in the body. So it is like a river flowing through your vessels that goes everywhere in your body. It's going to carry everything from nutrients to hormones to the gases from your breathing to even body heat. Okay? It is also a unique substance in the fact that it's the only fluid tissue in the body. So I know when we were doing the 11 organ systems assignment, we consider blood to be an organ. Truly, it is just a tissue, and it happens to be a fluid tissue. It's mostly connective tissue. The adult contains somewhere between 5 and 6 liters of blood. A 3-year-old will only contain about 2 pints, and a newborn baby contains really only about 1 cup of blood. It makes up about 8% of our body weight. Again, it is a type of connective tissue. We learned about the 4 types of tissue in our body's last unit, and it is one of the 4 types known as connective tissue. It contains 2 main parts to your blood. There's what we call the formed elements, which is the actual blood cells, and then there's the liquid portion that's called plasma. So we're going to discuss each more of these parts in depth. So let's look at the formed elements. If you were going to look at your whole blood, the formed elements make up about 45% of your blood, and all your blood cells are produced by what are called stem cells called hemocytoblasts. And those hemocytoblasts are found in your bone marrow. And the process of making your blood cells is called hematopoiesis. Okay? And that was in your prefix and suffix homework. So remember, heme means blood, and poiesis means production or formation. So hematopoiesis would mean forming blood or producing your blood. And in particular, we're paying attention to the blood cells. The 3 types of blood cells that make up your formed elements of your blood are red cells, white cells, and platelets. The scientific term for red cells is erythrocytes, and the primary job is to deliver oxygen to your cells. White blood cells make up less than 1% of that 45% of your blood, and their job is immunity and to fight infection. So they help with body defense, and it also helps with immunity. And then finally, the last formed element is known as platelets, or what we can call thrombocytes. And those are really just cell fragments rather than whole cells. And their job is to be involved in helping the blood clot. The second major part of your blood was plasma, and it was the liquid portion of your blood, and it makes up about 55% of your blood. Of the plasma, about 90% of plasma is just plain old water, and then the other 10% is things called plasma proteins, as well as hormones and salts and sugars and wastes. All of those things are what's being dissolved in your water that's in the plasma. So if we looked at whole blood again, out of the 100%, 45% is your formed elements, and then the other 55% is plasma. And if we break the formed elements down, almost all of it is red blood cells, and then less than 1% would be your white blood cells and platelets put together. And the white blood cells and platelets put together is known as the buffy coat, and it's this color right here that you can see. It's kind of the grayish color. And so if you were to put blood in this special machine called a centrifuge, you could actually separate it out into its different parts. And so the red cells are the heaviest, and so they're more dense. They're going to collect at the bottom. Then your white blood cells and platelets are going to connect in the middle, and then the liquid portion will be sitting on top, and that's the plasma. The color of your blood, of course it's red, but it can vary greatly from really bright scarlet red to a really dull brownish red. And what determines the color of your blood is how much oxygen is being carried in it. So if you were going to cut yourself and you were going to bleed, a lot of times you're going to see a darker red blood. because you're bleeding out of a capillary that maybe doesn't have much oxygen being carried because the oxygen's already been dropped off in your cells. If you were going to have your blood drawn, if you've ever watched them draw your blood or looked at the blood in the tube, it's a very dark red because they're drawing blood from your veins, and we'll learn about that more in the future, that veins don't have oxygenated blood, they have oxygen poor or deoxygenated blood in them. On the gory shows, when you see somebody get cut really, really deep and it's squirting out of their body, if it was being done accurately, it would be a really bright red because that would be where you have tons of oxygen in your blood, so it would be a really bright red. Blood is heavier than water, and it's much thicker. It's about 5 times thicker than water. It has a pH range of 7.35 to 7.45. I know the little picture shows 7.5. That would be on the very high end for your blood pH. And the temperature of blood is always a little bit higher than your body temperature because remember, one of the functions of blood is to transport body heat as well. Plasma proteins are the most abundant solutes, remember, or solid particles that are found in plasma. They are mostly made by your liver, and they have lots of different functions, and there's lots of different types of plasma proteins. So we're just going to look at 3 of them. One of them is called albumin, and it is a carrier molecule. It will carry other molecules throughout the blood. It also is involved in helping to maintain the blood pH levels, keep it where it should be, and it contributes to what's known as osmotic pressure, which means how much water pressure there is in the blood. So it's going to help keep water in the bloodstream, because if the osmotic pressure goes down, then it's going to hang on to that water versus letting that water go out into the tissues. Another type of plasma protein is clotting proteins, and those are going to be involved in the clotting process when you injure yourself and rupture or tear a blood vessel. And then finally, your antibodies are a type of plasma protein as well, and they're going to fight off infections for you. So most of those are made by your liver. So when they're out of whack in numbers, then your liver is going to get the message that it needs to produce more of those plasma proteins. Erythrocytes, let's look at those again. Those are, again, your red blood cells. They don't have a nucleus, so they're kind of interesting in that way. And again, their main function was to transport oxygen throughout the body. They also do transport small amounts of carbon dioxide. How they carry oxygen is through this special molecule that has iron on it called hemoglobin. And so the picture that you can see there is the molecule within the red blood cell that is literally attaching the oxygen to it. The normal shape of a red blood cell is kind of like a donut without the hole being all the way cut out in it. So it's what we call biconcave. That produces lots and lots of surface area so that it's easy for the red blood cell to attach as much oxygen as possible. That hemoglobin molecule plays a really important role in the shape of that red blood cell. So if your hemoglobin molecule is not normal, then probably the shape of your red blood cell is not normal either. Red blood cells are the most numerous type of cell we have in the blood, because remember, they made up almost all of the 45% of the blood that's formed elements. And their number is going to affect what we call the viscosity of the blood, or how thick your blood is. So if you end up having too many red blood cells, then your blood would be too thick. Let's look at a couple of disorders that involve the red blood cells. You have what's called anemia, sickle cell anemia, and polycythemia. So any decrease in the oxygen carrying ability of your blood is going to be known as anemia. And so, of course, this is going to involve your red blood cells because they're, again, the ones that are responsible for transporting the oxygen throughout the blood. 2 of the main causes of anemia, one is that you simply are low in your number of red blood cells. So you have a low, what we call RBC count, or red blood cell count. Another cause of anemia could be that your hemoglobin is deficient, meaning low in amount, or it's even abnormal. And so that's going to affect, again, the ability of the red blood cells to carry oxygen. Sickle cell anemia is a special form of anemia that is a genetic form, and it's where the hemoglobin is abnormal. And so that's going to, again, we said hemoglobin really plays a major role in the shape of red blood cells. So if hemoglobin is abnormal, then the shape of the red blood cell can be abnormal. So it's more of a sickle shape, which means it looks kind of like a quarter moon. And again, that's going to reduce the ability of the red blood cell to transport oxygen. Sickle cell anemia is actually most prevalent in Africa and South America. And the reason is because down there they have high cases of a disease that's carried by mosquitoes called malaria. And they've found that if you are a carrier of sickle cell anemia, so if you remember carrier from Bio-1, then you have a natural immunity to malaria because you have one gene that's abnormal, but they have one normal gene. So you don't have sickle cell anemia, but you carry the trait. And so now you have a natural immunity to malaria, so that gives you an advantage. You also don't have sickle cell, so you aren't sick that way, so you have a better chance of survival. The final disorder is called polycythemia. That was in your assignment as well. Poly means many, cyte is cell, and emia is blood condition. So this is where you have a lot of cells in your blood, and in this case we're looking specifically at red blood cells. So this is where you have an abnormal increase in the number of your red blood cells. What can cause this would be bone marrow cancer, or sometimes it can even be a normal response to when you live at really high altitudes and oxygen is less available. So that's why a lot of Olympic athletes actually train in the mountains, like in Colorado. They have one of the Olympic training centers there, because then the body is going to be forced to produce more red blood cells. So then when you go compete, you've got a better ability to keep oxygen flowing through your body. Leukocytes are white blood cells, and their main function is, again, defense against disease. Remember, they're less than 1% of your blood volume. They are really unique in that they're able to change shape, so they can actually leave the bloodstream, go where they're needed to fight infection, and then they can re-enter the bloodstream. And that process is called diapedesis. Diapedesis, that's kind of a weird word. White blood cells are going to respond to certain chemicals that are produced in your tissues when they are damaged or infected. And so then they get the message, so to speak, that they need to be released and go out and fight the infection. This is known as positive chemotaxis because they're responding positively to the chemicals being released by those damaged tissues. Whenever white blood cells are needed, your body is going to speed up their production. So the number of white blood cells in your body is going to increase. So that's one of the things, if you're feeling sick, that's one of the things they'll do is take a blood count, and they'll look to see if your white blood cells are elevated to know that maybe you are suffering from some kind of infection. Two types of leukocytes that we're interested in, there were many in your chapter that you read. There's basophils and eosinophils, and we're not interested in those. We're really just wanting to pay attention to the two known as lymphocytes and monocytes. There's a typo on my screen and it says leukocytes, so I'll have to go back and fix that. It should be lymphocytes, lymphocytes. They're going to be involved in immunity. They kind of are your memory cells. And so whenever you're attacked by a bacterium or a virus, you're going to go invade it and kill it. And then you're going to form these cells that remember that bacterium or virus. So if it tries to invade your body again, you won't get sick again because you'll be able to head it off and attack it before it can really make you sick. And that's not saying that you can't ever catch the same cold twice. And then the other kind we're interested in is called monocytes, and they're kind of more of what we call the cleanup team. And so they can kill bacteria as well, but they're not going to remember it then. They're just going to go clean it up, and they're also going to clean up things like dead cells too. There's three different disorders we're going to look at: leukocytosis, leukopenia, and leukemia. Leukocytosis is when the white blood cell count is above 11,000 cells per millimeter cubed. And this would be a good condition when you're trying to fight an infection. You would want to have leukocytosis, so you're going to be able to attack the bad things. Leukopenia is where you have a low white blood cell count, and it can be caused by certain drugs, and it can be caused by chemotherapy when you're getting cancer treatments. And then leukemia is an actual cancer where the bone marrow is producing really large amounts of white blood cells that are abnormal cells, so they don't function properly, and that can cause other problems like anemia and bleeding problems. Finally, we have platelets, and they are cell fragments. Again, they're not really whole cells, and their main job is to be involved in the blood clotting process whenever you rupture or break a blood cell, or a blood vessel, excuse me. And that's it for today's lecture.